Hey class, Prof JC here, and I got to tell you, this might be one of my favorite things to talk about as we're wrapping up our class. If we were in a 16-week class together, this would be something we would spend a little time on. Mental models and ethics. How do we determine ethics? And I think mental models, really the two of them kind of come together. And so what I thought we would do today is just kind of dive in a little bit to mental models. There's so much more we could talk about than what we're going to talk about today, but this is kind of an overarching view of it. And then dive into ethics in terms of what is important for you to know as a business person about why ethics are important for you, is maybe if you're going to found your own company, if you're working in an organization, you're going to be a manager, you're going to be CEO maybe one day for some of you in the class. Why is it that ethics, what we're going to talk about today, why is this important? This is not a business ethics class. And so I want to make ethics important for you. Okay. Why you need to understand how important this is and how it helps develop culture. And as the saying out there, people said Peter Drucker said this, and other people, he didn't say it. I don't know who said this, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what that means is that when you're building a company, you're going to build it based on strategy, processes, and products and service and sales and marketing, all that stuff. But culture, that's the people. Okay. That's the human beings that come. And we'll talk about that today, why this is important. And ethics create the culture of the organization. Okay. So that's how I want us to talk about this today. So mental models, ethics, they all kind of go together. And so let's dive in and just kind of look at what we're going to talk about today. So first I want to talk about this idea of mental models. And this is something we could have talked about in the first 4 weeks of class because it's personal, but it's also organizational. Okay. It will help you be a better person understanding mental models, but it will also help you as you're trying to become a better business person. Business leadership, okay, which is all of us in this class, whether you're getting an MBA or an MAOL, we're all, whether in for-profit or nonprofit, we're all in positions, or we're moving towards, or we're hoping to move towards positions of leadership. And leadership is nothing if it's not decision making. Decision making and how we make decisions, one of the most important things that we can learn how to do as business people, as leaders. Mental models will help you make decisions. And here's the deal. You have mental models already. I have mental models already. But the question you have to ask, are the mental models, or do the mental models that you currently have they helped you get to where you want to get to? Have they helped you build a team? Have they helped you build an organization? Are they helping you lead well? Are they helping you get promoted? Whatever it is, okay? And if not, then the cool thing about studying mental models are these different ways of thinking and different ways of decision making. And when something comes on our plate, we can stop and say, okay, I don't know how to make this decision, but let me run it through some mental models first, and this will help me make decisions. I got to tell you, I discovered these through studying billionaires, honestly. The two or three that come to mind, the one in particular is Charlie Munger. He talks a lot about this. And if you don't know Charlie Munger, I encourage you to figure out, just study Charlie Munger, find some YouTube videos. He hasn't written a lot of books, but he is one of the wisest persons that I believe has ever lived. But he talks a lot about mental models and how it helps us think. Charles Koch was another one that I heard talk about this. Jeff Bezos, I've heard him talk a little bit about this. Elon Musk talks a lot about first principles thinking. Warren Buffett has also talked a little bit about about mental models. Charlie Munger, I think, is the top one, though. And then there are books out there on mental models. When I begin to study these, game changing, absolutely life transforming. And even to this day, as I'm trying to make decisions or whatever, I'll always run them through these mental models. So let's dive in here so we can talk a little bit about what this is. Mental models are deeply held beliefs, assumptions, and thought patterns that shape how we perceive, understand, and respond to the world. And here's the deal. You already have mental models. Whether you know it or whether you know what to call it or not, you have mental models in your mind right now. You have deeply held beliefs and assumptions and thought patterns that shape how you perceive, understand, and respond to the world. Okay. They serve as these mental models, the ones we currently have and the ones that we can develop over time. Maybe if we want to have better decision making, they serve as internal frameworks that help us interpret complex situations, make decisions, and predict outcomes. And let me tell you, from a leadership perspective, from a business perspective, from a management perspective, this is what you've got to know how to do. Okay. How do you interpret complex situations? They're not always easy to do. And that's why mental models help us. How do you make decisions? Not always easy to do. That's why mental models help us. And how do we predict outcomes? That's not always easy to do. And again, mental models aren't going to help you be a magician and you're now going to, have mental models and now you can go out and invest and you'll find the next Facebook or Google or whatever it is. It's not necessarily going to do that, but it's going to help us all think better. Okay. As you're making decisions moving forward. Mental models are invisible but powerful. They operate subconsciously, influencing how we filter information and solve problems. And again, you already have mental models. They're already things that work subconsciously as you're making decisions. But are they the right things, right? Are they the right models, that are helping you make great decisions? They are self-reinforcing, right? Once established, mental models are difficult to change because they shape how we interpret new information. And again, I would say some of the ones that we're going to talk about, once you can name the mental model, it's going to be much easier. But if you have ones that you do have mental models. I keep saying that, but maybe you have certain ones right now that aren't helping you make the best decisions. The reason why maybe you continue to make decisions that you're not quite proud of, or maybe not proud of is the right word, but aren't effective, maybe in business and life, whatever it may be, are because the mental models you have, they're subconscious, right? And they're self-reinforcing and they're hard to change. Okay. Mental models are subject to bias. They're shaped by personal experiences, education, culture, meaning they can be incomplete or inaccurate, which is why we need to study other mental models that are out there. They can be updated, and that's what this is about today. By challenging assumptions and adopting new perspectives, we can refine our mental models for better decision making. So if you're out there and you're saying, I'm trying to make better decisions, this is how we do it right here. Okay. It's by having better mental models. That's how we make better decisions. Okay. So now this is a graph that I use quite a bit whenever I'm talking about mental models. This is important. Typically what happens is you're looking at that screen right there. Most people, when they make decisions, and now I know I'm talking to a bunch of master's students. So you are like 13% of the population has a master's degree. You are a cut above everyone else. Okay. So I'm not necessarily saying that this is you. And some of you already have great mental models that help you think better and make better decisions. But most of society, especially people who probably aren't self-aware, okay, when they make decisions, they go from information and then they skip all the way over to decision. Information and skip to decision. Now, what does that do for us? Okay. So I want you to think about, in your workplace, let's say you're in a position of leadership, you're a manager, and somebody starts coming in late, okay, and they start, and maybe it's someone who's been on time most of the time, and all of a sudden they start coming in late. The information, if you're not aware about what's going on, the information is going to lead you to a decision. And the information is this person showing up late, decision, they've showed up late 5 times, they're going to fire them. Okay. A mental model slows us down and helps us to think through certain things, right? Now you got to understand what mental model to use. Not every mental model, and we'll go through some examples here in just a second. Not every mental model is for every situation, but if you can slow yourself down and, for instance, in this one, it might be systems thinking. Okay. Someone is showing up late. That's the information. You go straight to decision. I'm going to fire him. The mental model slows you down. And let's say you pick out and I think systems thinking works for almost anything. And we'll talk about this here in a second. So you pick the mental model of systems thinking that everything is connected. Okay. Everything is connected. Okay. So when you start to think that way, that there's a cause and effect, you start thinking, okay, there's something deeper going on here that's making this person show up late. Okay. So systems thinking means you step out and you take a 30,000 foot view of that situation, whatever the situation is, and then you come down and you make a decision. But first, you raise yourself all the way up to 30,000 foot view. You look at the whole system and you say, okay, what is causing this? And so, what you might do is you bring the person in and say, hey, talk to me a little bit about this. It seems to me that you've always been on time, and now the last couple of weeks you've been showing up late. And then they start telling you about things that are going on at their home or situations that are happening, or their car, maybe they got in a wreck and so their car's getting fixed, or who knows what the situation might be. But systems thinking is raising up out of it. Okay, now if you don't do that, if you're not self-aware, you'll go from information to decision. System mental models just in general help slow us down and help us make better decisions than what we might make without them. Okay, so here are some examples of mental models you might use. First principles thinking. This is one that if you study Elon Musk, he talks about this a lot. Okay, so this is breaking down problems to their fundamental truths and reason up from there like a physicist or an engineer. So anytime you're going through something, so this could be personally, this could be in the organization, you break it all the way down to what is the fundamental truth. Okay, about this issue, whatever it is. Let's go all the way back to first principles thinking, and then we can come up from there and we can make a better decision. Okay, that's first principles thinking. There's a lot of information online about it. That might be a great place for you to start. Anytime you're getting ready to make a decision, especially when it's complex, right? So if you're dealing with a complex situation, what you have to do is cut through the noise and you start thinking from first principles. I wish we would almost have a class that just talked about mental models, where for the entire 8 weeks we talked about this, because there's so many places we could go with this. Obviously, I'm giving the overarching, so we can't dive in deep. But again, you can research this, and there are books. I was actually at the beach yesterday, and I took a book with me. Shane Harris, I think, is the guy, and he's got 2 books that are on mental models that go really in depth on this. But first principles thinking, complex situation, break it all the way down to the fundamental truth, to the basic concept of whatever it was, whatever it is, and then you reason up, you make decisions from there. Okay, opportunity cost. Every choice has a cost. The next best alternative, you give up. Okay, so this is critical for time and money and energy, decisions. Okay, so you always look at what's the cost of this. Okay, in terms of time and money and resources. Okay, before you make a decision, you can look more on this. Charlie Munger talks about this next one a lot. Inversion. Instead of asking, so he talks about invert, always invert. If you're going to make a decision, always invert. So oftentimes an example is we might ask ourselves in a business decision or a life decision, what's going to make us succeed? Okay. What will make this, succeed? What will make me succeed? Whatever it is. What what he subscribes to, this mental model, he talks a lot about this. What will cause this to fail? And then you avoid those factors. He uses a joke out there where he talks about, tell me where I'm going to die and I'll just never go to that place ever again. That's inversion thinking. Okay. Where you say, okay, what might cause death? What might cause failure? Whatever it is. Okay. Instead of saying what's going to make this successful, which is not a bad place to start. And you can look at that, this business we're trying to build, this team, this organization within this department, whatever it is, what will make this, succeed. But you can also look at it and say from a mental model perspective, what will cause this to fail? And then you look at those things and say, I'm not going to do those things. I mean, this is applicable in anything. It's applicable in your own personal life, in your relationships, right? As opposed to what's going to make this relationship succeed? Well, what will cause this relationship to fail? And then don't do those things. That's inversion thinking. Okay. Again, a great mental model when you're trying to make decisions, and maybe that's new opportunities coming your way, and obviously you would take the opportunity cost, but then you would look at it from inversion. Okay, if this thing is coming your way, and you're trying to decide how do I make this succeed. Well, also look at the inversion of that is what could cause this to fail, and just don't do those things, right? You're getting ready to go to graduate school. What would cause, we think, how does this make me, how am I going to succeed in graduate school? Well, I go to classes and I make sure I get my work turned in on time and make sure I read the books that my professors ask me to read, blah, 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 whatever it is. But then the inverse is also true, to look at the inversion. What would cause me to fail? Well, if I don't do my homework, if I don't show up to class, if I don't do the reading and understand, if I'm not studying for tests and exams, if I'm not meeting with professors, don't do those things, right? If I'm not showing up to networking events and getting to know people and, whatever it is, Don't do that. Do the opposite of that. Okay. Second order thinking. I love this one. Look beyond the immediate effects of a decision to see long term consequences. Okay. So this is kind of like then what thinking. Okay. So second order consequences might be, so here's an example I give. Now this is a personal example, but you want to use this in business as well. If I am starving one night and I'm really hungry and I want to get something to eat, first order consequences, if I'm always thinking in first order consequences, I'm only thinking immediately, right now. How do I solve the problem right now? Okay. So I'm hungry. So then I go get, Chick-fil-A. And let's say next night I'm hungry, so I go get Chick-fil-A. Next night I'm hungry, I get, Chick-fil-A. What's going to happen to me physically if I continue to go get Chick-fil-A every single night or In and Out or whatever it is? You know the answer to that. Second order and third order, actually, some people Ray Dalio talks about this. Ray Dalio was another one. That was another billionaire. I think he was the first one that helped me start to see from principles and mental models. He was the very first person I started to read, and then I started to read about other people and find out why are all these billionaires talking about this thing called mental models, and then I began to study it. But he was the first one, and he talks about second and third order consequences. So anytime we're getting ready to make a decision, so first order, I'm hungry, go to Chick-fil-A or In and Out. What's going to happen long term? But if I immediately go to third order consequences, okay, or second order, I begin to look down the road and say, okay, I'm hungry, I want Chick-fil-A, but what's this going to do? Well, it's less money in my account, it's not good for me health wise, right? So I start going out, or I start going down this list of here are all the different consequences of what's going to happen, not just right now. If I eat right now, I'm going to be satisfied. That's going to be great. But I'm also going to have less money in my account. I'm going to feel lethargic. I'm not going to be as healthy as I could be. And if I continue to do this down the road, how many hundreds of dollars am I going to spend every year on this? Thousands of dollars maybe, because Chick-fil-A is expensive. How many, am I going to spend every year? What's that going to do to my health? What's that going to do to my habits? How's that going to transform kind of how I think? And then when you begin to think all the way out, you realize, okay, I'm not going to stop at Chick-fil-A tonight. I'm going to go home and I'm going to make myself some, chicken salad or whatever it might be. Okay. Now, yes, you can get a chicken salad from In and Out, but again, it's going to cost you, right? So second order thinking. So think about in business, how you think about that. Okay. You've got a new product that you want to bring to market. You've got a new service. You've got somebody you want to hire for your team. And you think immediately, I need someone right now. But then you start, doing some research on the person. You realize they've gotten fired from 2 or 3 different jobs in the past, or maybe they haven't done well, or they've left, they've had, 6 jobs in 5 years. And so then you bring this person on because you're only thinking from first order thinking, and then they quit within 6 months or something happens. And if you would have thought all the way through what are the consequences of this, you might have made a better decision. Same for products, services, whatever it might be, second order thinking. Pareto principle, I won't spend a lot of time on this. You've heard about this before. Roughly 80% of outcomes come from 20% of causes. So focus on the vital few over the trivial many. I have found in my own life, the Pareto, principle, I think I've shared this before with you guys, is as I'm looking to become more successful and trying to up my own game. I have horrible nighttime habits. I love to stay. I did it last night. I had a lot of work I had to get done, and for some reason, when I sit here in my office and then I'll turn on a show or something on one of my screens, and then I just can work. And I love to do that. And I could stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning just at my computer working. And I've got a TV show, so I'm killing two birds with one stone. I'm watching I'm watching Industry right now, and before that was White Lotus and Succession and some of these shows. And but I'm killing two birds with one stone because I can get a lot of work done while I'm. But it's not good for me long term, right? And so I have found for me to get better, JC, I've got to the 20% for me is, and it's actually like 5%. If I can fix this, everything gets better. It's going to bed on time, right? It's setting a bedtime, and I've done that. I've got a system now, and I actually spent time working on it last week, a better system for myself. And so now it's following the system. That's what we're talking about here. I could focus on all kinds of other things, right? How do I get better in this and that and in this and teaching and grading and PowerPoints and sales and marketing for business and all this stuff. But really, I've discovered if I can get better at this one thing, which is sleep, everything else is going to get better. That's kind of the same thing we're looking at here. Okay. Focus on the 20%, not the 80%. Circle of competence. Okay. Operate within areas you deeply understand and recognize where you don't. We've talked about this in your own life. We didn't call it this, but what we talked about this as you're cycling through the Hurtado concept of forward movement. It's about building capabilities. And so when you start, you want to build capabilities within your circle of competence, the areas that only you understand. Well, maybe not only you, but that you deeply understand and you can succeed there. And as you get successful there and you decide to reinvest profits, reinvest resources, that's when your circle of competence will grow through reading, through studying, whatever it is. But anytime you're starting something, you want to start with your circle of competence. Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice, which can be explained by stupidity or neglect. I love that one. Helps avoid unnecessary conflict. So we're always thinking this person's coming after me and they're doing this to me on purpose. And really, maybe they're just a stupid person or they're a neglectful person. Usually it's not that they're stupid, they're just neglectful, right? And they forgot something. But instead of taking everything personal, right? A mental model is Hanlon's razor, right? So it's not malice. This person's just neglectful, so I don't have to get mad at them. I just realize they're human beings. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is often the best. Don't overcomplicate. That's a really good one. You can study about that one. Confirmation bias. We got to understand this. This is what gets a lot of us in trouble. We tend to seek information that confirms our own beliefs, right? So how do we counter it? By seeking disconfirming, information. So when you're getting ready to make that hire, and I see it time and time. I've seen it at Point Loma. I've seen it in other organizations that I've worked for before. I see it all the time. Someone brings someone in and we want to see the very best in that person. So we have confirmation bias and we're overlooking this. We're not making the calls maybe to the former employer or the former employer. It's not what they do say, it's what they're not saying. And we're not listening to that, right? So what we have to understand is we've got to counter it by seeking disconfirming evidence. That's confirmation bias. So that's a really good mental model to understand is maybe you want to have a disconfirmation bias. Maybe that's what you'd call the mental model is how do I find information that disconfirms what I think to be true? Okay. Just a few more examples here. Incentives. Charlie Munger talks about this a lot. People follow incentives, even perverse ones. So show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. Okay. Sunk cost fallacy. Don't factor past unrecoverable cost into current decisions. Cut losses when necessary. A lot of people, you make decisions like this in relationships or in business or in life. Well, I've put all this time and money and energy into this person, into this thing, into this business, whatever it is. I got to keep it going. You see this a lot in businesses. People spend a lot of time investing. Maybe they get a loan for the bit or whatever it is. So so they said, well, I got to keep, and the business isn't working. It's failing as a matter of fact, but they say, I got to keep going, keep going. Sunk cost fallacy says this. No, stop doing that, right? Cut the losses. Don't worry about them, right? They're unrecoverable cost. You can't worry about it, okay? And you don't worry about that when you're making current decisions. You look at what needs to go. Okay, that's creative destruction, right? This is why a lot of people, we talk about creative destruction. It's why a lot of people can't do it because they look at, well, look at all the work I've done for this. And so they can't creatively destruct those things in their life. No, you can't look at that. Cut losses when necessary. That's for people, for businesses, for departments, whatever it is, okay? You hire the wrong person, right? And you invest a lot in that person and they're not working out, you got to cut your losses, okay? Law of diminishing returns. You've heard this before. After a certain point, additional effort or investment yields, decrease benefits. Probabilistic. Probabilistic, I hope I'm saying that correct, thinking in terms of likelihoods and uncertainty, not certainty. So nothing in life is certain. The future is unknown and unknowable. So when you think in terms of certainties, that's when disappointment happens. Think in terms of likelihood. If I do this, there's a likelihood that this could happen, right? Or maybe even think in terms of uncertainty. I'm not certain that could happen, but it possibly could. That alleviates some disappointment down the road. Systems thinking, we talked about that. View problems as part of a larger interconnected whole, not isolated parts. I promise you this. When you're getting ready to make life or business decisions, if you choose systems thinking, this will be a game changer for you. It means you come up and you take a 30,000 foot view and you come all the way back down. And then you make that decision. Scarcity versus abundance mindset. Scarcity breeds fear and hoarding. Abundance opens up collaboration and opportunity. So imagine if you're in the workplace and you've got a scarcity mindset, it's breeding fear. Okay. And so what do you do with fear? You push people away. You don't you don't develop good relationships. What's mine? Mine, 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 mine. Me, right? It becomes all about you. If you have an abundance mindset, a mental model of abundance, you're open to collaboration and opportunity, and not just opportunity for yourself, opportunity for others as well, because you realize that there's abundance out there. There's enough for you as well. Now, here's some of my own. Okay, I won't talk about these too much. Long-term thinking. Think in terms of years and decades, not moments and days. I found that to be so true in my own life. I was a late bloomer. I got a late start in my whole 20s. During most of my 20s, I was messing up and trying to figure it out. And then I got into 30s, and honestly, I got into therapy, and that's really transformed everything. Did 9 years of therapy, and oh my goodness, I mean, just transformed everything. My life is, if you could have known me in my 20s and know me now, you realize it's just two different people. Um, and so even now, sometimes I get discouraged. I'm thinking I'm not as far along as I want to be at the age 46, financially or my profession or whatever it might be. And so I have to remind myself, think long term, right? I'm a person who's going to work till I'm 85. There's no question. I don't understand retirement. I don't understand people who retire at 65. That just doesn't register with me at all. I don't understand that. So when I get in these mindsets and I'm like, I'm 46 and I'm not as far as long as I want to be, and blah, 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 blah. I've got these things or whatever. I just think, JC, long term thinking. You're not done for another 39 years. You got 39 more years to go. And now with the information, that I've got, hopefully I can, reproduce and get better much quicker. It's not going to take decades to 10x. Hopefully it'll take 2 or 3 years now, right? So long-term thinking, that helps. So that might be one you want to take. The hard path principle, love this one. The hard path and the right path are often the same. So if I've got two decisions to make in life, oftentimes I'll look and I'll say, okay, which one's the hard path? Which one's the harder path? And 99% of the time, that's the path I'm supposed to take. And even right now, as I'm figuring out things, in terms of my own career and my life here at Point Loma, which I'll be here for a long time, I hope. And then also my business that's growing as well. As I'm looking at that, I'm saying, okay, if I've got two options here, which one is the more difficult path? And I found every time I take that path, that's the correct path. It could be conversations, right? Maybe in the workplace, you're having a difficulty with somebody. You need to have that tough conversation, but you don't want to because no one wants conflict. I certainly don't like conflict, but then you take the hard path principle. It's a mental model, the hard path and the right path. So which one's the difficult path? Okay, that's the path I need to take. The love principle. And this is actually one that I'm trying to figure out a better name for this, but that's the only name I have right now. But I've been slowly introducing this, even in some of the corporate workshops that I'll do with some companies, because I really believe in this. When we hear the word love, we typically think of very selfish kind of love, right? It's emotional, it's emotions based, it's feelings based, and that's why we don't use that in the corporate world very often, nonprofit, for profit, whatever it is. We don't use it in the workplace. But I believe that love is this, and this is from St. Augustine. Love is seeking the highest good. Now he would say love is seeking the highest good for the other. Okay, and so anytime we're making a decision, is this a loving decision? How do we make that decision? Am I seeking the highest good for the other person? I added on to this, love is seeking the highest good for self and the other. Should say the other right there. Anytime you're thinking about decisions for yourself, is this the highest good for you? Right? Is spending time doing this, is this your highest good? Choosing this relationship, is this your highest good? Working for this company, is this your highest good? Right? So the love principle, I think, works everywhere. And even from a leadership perspective, a boss, a management perspective, when we're thinking from that perspective in an organization, right? And you're thinking about your people, love is seeking the highest good for self and other. It's not just self, it's also other. So, if I'm managing these people, am I seeking the highest good for them? Okay. And so I always have to ask myself. So anyway, there's some mental models right there. So I think mental models, again, if we had a lot more time, we could explain this and we could work through this and we do some case studies. Mental models are really important as we're determining ethics as well, at least corporate ethics, company ethics, organizational ethics, which is what I really want us to talk about today. So that's mental models. My encouragement, study that as much as you can. Get to know mental models, because you already have some. You already have, so, and if we're not careful, just one last thing I'll say this. I grew up in a very negative home, with just very negative parents, and well, my mom tended to be, and these are great people. The older I've gotten, 9 years of therapy, I've realized we're all doing the best we can with the tools we had at the time. All right. So, some of us don't have great tools. Some of us have better tools, but I think she just was fearful. She grew up in a fearful home with her parents being very fearful. And then we had a church we went to, it was a really small church, and everything was fearful. And it was always they, right? The world is coming to get you, and they're out there and they're trying to get us. And so we grew up in this kind of a, fearful environment. And so that got into my mindset. And so I used to make a lot of decisions based on fear and based on anxiety. And I don't necessarily want to do this thing or whatever it might be. And so understanding that and understanding kind of my upbringing and how I got those mental models and how I begin to think that way and how I begin to see people subconsciously from a fearful perspective and judge people incorrectly. So anyway, mental models has been deeply transformed. That was my confirmation bias that came from growing up deeply. Mental models over the years have been incredibly helpful in making better decisions. Now let's talk about ethics. Okay. So how do we determine ethics in an organization? Okay. Now here's the first thing that I want us to go to. Well, so let's just come back to this chart right here. Okay. This is a great way, I think, to look at ethics. Okay. Typically when we're looking at ethics, we're looking at three different things. When we're getting ready to make a decision, is this decision ethical? Is it legal? Is it moral? And these are three different worlds. I want you to understand that. Three completely different worlds. Is it ethical? Is it legal? Is it moral? Okay, so ethics. Okay, so let's look at this. You're getting ready to make a decision. You have to know what the ethics are of the situation. Here's how ethics are determined. They're determined by the society. Okay, so that's a larger society, or by a profession. Okay. So if you grow up in certain societies around the world, think around the globe, you have different ethics that come with growing up in those societies. If you choose different professions, and I'll give you some examples here in just a second, there are different ethics based on these different professions that you choose. Ethics are enforceable by your peers. They're enforceable by institutions. So if you do something that your peers think is unethical, that it's not accepted in that context, in that society, in that profession, right? So maybe in the healthcare profession, they have what's called the Hippocratic Oath. Okay. And so with the Hippocratic Oath, part of that is you take this oath, and if you don't tell the secrets of your patients. Okay. That's just one part of the Hippocratic Oath. So let's say somebody came out and you heard them talking about, hey, maybe they're in healthcare and they had this really famous client who showed up on XYZ day. And then they went out and they told everyone, hey, so-and-so showed up today and they were in our clinic, and here's the problem they have. And your peers hear about that, who believe in the Hippocratic Oath, who took the Hippocratic. They might come back, and the institution might come back and say, what you did was unethical, right? Maybe it wasn't legally wrong. You're not going to go to jail for it. Maybe for you, it wasn't morally wrong what you did, but it was unethical based on the institution and based on that profession that you chose. So it could be a fireable offense. Who knows what the consequences are, but it's unethical. But the people that will lock you back into place after something like that will be your peers in the institution. That's your bosses, that your managers, your leaders, all that kind of stuff. There's flexibility when it comes to ethics, because it's context specific. This is one of the most important things you have to understand. Okay. And as we get to morals, I want you to understand this as well. Ethics are context specific. Different companies have different ethics, different things that they allow, different principles, different values. And so one company you work with, maybe you love their ethics. You go to another one because you love their principles and values. You go to another one and they don't have the same. Now, where we have to be careful, and we'll talk about this more in a second, is when you back up your morals versus their ethics. That's where the problems happen a lot of times within culture, or your frustrations with companies or organizations, because you're measuring your morals against their ethics. And there's two different things. And here's something we have to understand when we study ethics. It's taking judgment out of it. It's standing on top of it and seeing it for what it is. And just saying, this context has a certain set of ethics. And if I'm going to succeed here, I need to buy into this. If I'm not going to succeed here, I need to find somewhere else that matches up. Okay. but they're context specific. Okay. Um, Corporate codes of conduct. So that's an example. And different corporations have different codes of conduct. Different companies have different codes of conduct. What works in one organization is not going to work in another one. Okay. So we have to understand that. So that's ethics. Very flexible, depending on where you are. And not only think about companies, think about states and cities. And then you think about organizations and national organizations. You think about countries, and different parts of the world have different ethics. It's very context specific. That's the most important thing I want you to understand. Very context specific. Okay. Now, legal, okay, is set by the government, and it's enforceable by courts and police. There's no flexibility when it comes to the law. It's black or white. Did you do this? Did you not? It's legal. It's illegal. Okay. Were you driving under the influence above the, what is it, point 0.8 or 0.008 or whatever it is? You know, were you driving? Okay. You take the test. You know, and they decide that you're above the point 0.8 or 0.08, that's legal. They immediately put you in handcuffs and you go straight off to jail. There's no, well, okay, well, it was like 0.09, you know, that's close, right? That's more of an ethical thing. This is legal, black or white. So an example of that would be employment law, right? So human resources, you're probably going to study employment law. It's important for you to understand. Those things are black and white. Moral, okay, this is very individual and it's based on culture. And when we say culture, I mean the people around you. So the culture of your family, the culture of your church, if you went to church growing up, the culture of your schools, the culture of your cities, right? And these are all different cultures there. But a lot of times that will determine what your own morals are. It's enforceable by you, your own conscience. You know, if you have a certain set, you have a moral standard, you know if you fall short of that moral standard, right? It also can be enforced by social pressure. Okay. I grew up in a church, a really small church. We just talked about that. And we had a certain way of looking at life. And if you stepped out of that, right, there was social pressure, especially in the youth group. I don't know, some of you ever went to youth group, and everybody had these views of things. And, if you didn't fall into line with those views, there was social pressure and you'd be on the outs. Okay. And some of you probably experienced that in church communities. When you go into a church community or a faith-based community, you better believe quickly what they believe, or it's not going to work for you there. There's going to be social pressure that you need to either conform or get out. Okay. But then once it becomes from social pressure to personal, that's when your conscience takes over. And then you tell a lie and you realize, okay, I follow the 10 commandments and I'm not supposed to lie. And I told a lie. I stole something, right? And I followed 10 commandments, right? And so I'm not supposed to steal. So that's become very personal. The flexibility, it's deeply personal. Okay. And I would say for a lot of people, it's not necessarily flexible because it's so personal. Okay. That's why it's hard to transform people's morals, how they see the world from that moral code, because it is, maybe it started off with they grew up in a certain area of the country, and then maybe your faith-based community and your teachers and professors and all those kind of people that came along, but then it got ingrained to who you are. Very hard to change this. Very hard to change. That's why when you sit down and you have people from different religions, try to change each other, it doesn't work because it's so core to who they are. An example would be religious teachings on honesty, right? So if you have a religion that believes that, and all of them do, I don't know of any religion that says it's okay to lie, but if you follow that religion and that has developed your moral code, then it's going to be really tough for you to be dishonest because that's a moral code. It's very personal to who you are. So you see how ethics and morals are different. And the problem you have to understand is when you try to bring your moral code into a place that has a different set of ethics, that's where it's not going to mesh up. And some of you've done that before. You've worked in organizations and you wondered, why am I not okay with what's going on around here? It's because your moral code is bumping against their organizational ethics. And if you're not careful, what you're going to try to do is be a crusader and try to change the organization. It's not going to work. I caution people against that all the time. You will, in time, be fired. One of the first experiences I had, I grew up in a home where I had my first job. I mean, I started working from a young age, mowing the lawns, and we just had a home that really, I had to work. and that was just part of it. And we had an allowance and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thankful to my parents for that. That's one thing that I will tell you this: my parents got right. Started me working young. And then I went and worked for a grocery store, worked for a guy by the name of Jim or Garo Rudisell, and Jim Rogers was it. They were two managers, very hard workers. And then I grew up in a place. That's one thing I love about the Midwest. A lot of hard workers. They just whatever they did, they took it seriously and they worked. And then I went and worked in a warehouse right out of high school. Um, it wasn't even a gap year. I just didn't know what I was doing. So I moved down to Indianapolis and I find this job in a warehouse and I start working there. And it just was a lazy group of people. That's what they were. Now, I got to be careful saying that. I shouldn't say they were lazy. They'd been there a long time. They'd figured out how to do the work, and they realized, and this is something that happens as you get older. They realized I don't need to give 100% maximum, effort every single day because if I do that, I'm going to burn myself out. Well, I'm 18 years old and I'm 17, 18, and I'm brand new to this environment. And I came out of this high speed, work, 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 work. And so I went in there and the ethics of that place were, hey, chill, take your time, be cool. And I remember my boss, Levi, he would try to tell me this all the time. He'd say, hey man, you need to chill it out. Right. So let me show you how this is done. And I didn't listen, didn't listen. I found myself basically pushed out of that, company. It was a huge lesson for me. I was fired. But I remember when I was fired because I had a car issue, and so I had to start taking the bus. I lived across town, so I was getting late every day. But I probably could have kept my job had I had good relationships in that place. But I didn't because my moral code, which I've lessened up, as I've gotten older as well. My moral code was get in there and work hard every single minute. Don't take breaks, blah, 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 blah. And I'm working with these group of people who that's just not how they see the world. And so it didn't mesh up. And I remember I tried to change things and I tried to, and I got booted out. Okay. That's the same thing. So be very careful about this. Okay. Your moral code and a company's ethical code can be different. Now, when you find nirvana is when you match up your moral code with organizational ethics. And that's the kind of company you want to work for. Okay. Ethics are context specific. They're typically shaped by a combination of philosophical reasoning, professional standards, and societal expectations. Okay. So here's what we mean. The philosophical frameworks. Okay. This is like if you take an ethics class and you study different ways and you choose one of these, this is how I'm going to see the world. Virtue ethics, justice ethics, so whatever they might be. Okay. Where you look and you say, utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. That's how I'm going to view the world. Well, okay, that's going to be how you view the world. Those become your ethics. Duty-based, right? What is right, regardless of the outcome. I do what is right. That's how you're going to see the world. Virtue ethics. You focus on character and what would a good person do? Maybe you study Aristotle. That's what you do. Justice ethics, right? Fairness and equity, and that's how you see the world. Okay, so that determines your ethics. And so again, if you get to a company and you decide you're a person who's based on, duty ethics, your duty-based ethics, you do what is right. And then maybe you go into a sales company where they, the ethics are a little bit loose there. It's all about getting the sales. You're probably not going to mesh up because your morals and the ethics are not going. So the study of ethics really is helping you figure out how do you see the world. And then you got to match that based on the company that you work in. Or where you go. So the different industries, we talked about this already. In the medical ethics, you've got the Hippocratic Oath. Legal ethics, you've got the American Bar Association, right? And the rules that they have, and they take that very seriously. Most lawyers I know take that very seriously. Business ethics. There's codes of conduct within companies, corporations, ESG standards, being honest and being ethical. I shouldn't say ethical because, as we're saying, it's different for different companies, but being honest and being truthful, being authentic, right? So these are developed by professional bodies, institutions to ensure trust, responsibility, and accountability in that field. Okay. This is what determines cultural and social norms. Society plays a huge role in shaping what is considered ethical in a specific time and place. So here's some examples. Child labor was once widely accepted. Now it's viewed as unethical. Even if it's still legal in some places, no one's going to do it. Okay, it's unethical. Data privacy ethics are evolving as tech companies collect more personal. That's a huge issue right now. Ethics involving societies changing and expectations and values. Cultural views, here are some examples right here. Okay. If you go to different countries around the world, they're going to have different views and different ethics on men's roles. Well, what's the man's role in society? What's the man's role in the home? And in different countries and different kinds of people are going to say it different. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she had this belief that men are providers and they should provide. Okay, if the women need to a little bit, fine. But the most important provider in the home is the man. That's a way of looking at it. And there's no judgment. Remember, we talked about that when we're talking about ethics, you've got to take the judgment out. There's no judgment on that. That's just how that person perceived it. On women's roles, travel the world and you'll see different views on this, right? You go to the Asian cultures, you'll see something. You go to South American cultures, you see something different. Here in America, here in the United States of America, it's different. Go to Europe, it's different. Go to the Middle East. Some of the problems we've had there when we're trying to we're trying to force our values, the U.S. values, on the Middle East. And some of those societies and cultures have been around for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, and we're trying to take a country that's only been around, us, 250 years, 200 something years, 279 years, whatever it is. We're a relatively new country, and we're trying to take these newer values that we have and force them on other countries. We have to be careful about that. Okay, what we think is right is not all. Again, it's ethics. Okay, there's flexibility there, depending on where you go. LGBTQ rights. My sister. She shared with the world several years ago that she's LGBTQ, and I remember the biggest problem she had was that her moral views were bumping up against a lot of the ethical issues. We grew up again in a small town. My parents still live in a small town. Parents really struggle with it and have continued to struggle with it. And I remember going home and trying to take up the cause. And finally, I just sat with my sister and I said, "Hey, you're bumping up against this. Your codes of conduct, your morals, your ethics are different from what parents and family members, what they are because of where they were raised and what they grew up with. And you ended up leaving, you went to a place, a culture that was more accepting, but they're not. And so if you're going to have peace here, you got to understand that you're just going to see the world differently than they do." And that all kind of worked itself out. But that's something we see here. Different views on that cause problems with this. Civil rights, okay? Different views on this, religion and faith, capitalism, socialism, communism. Go around the world and you have different people who say different things about these. Autocratic versus democratic societal and marketplace leadership. I was listening to a podcast the other day with was a guy who's he's a Delta Force guy, and they were asking him. He did some work in Iraq. Should we have taken Saddam Hussein out back in 2003? And his answer was no. Right? Again, we were trying to place our U.S. centric model of leadership, which is democratic, and we're trying to take that over to a world where it just didn't fit. And what was best for them was more of an autocratic leader. Okay, it worked for them, and there are a lot of studies about this. So again, ethics so different, and we got to understand that. So here's a question I want you to consider. What do you and I, or just our world today, what do we consider ethical today that 100 years from now, humans will be shocked that we allowed? Okay, I want you to think about that. What do we consider ethical today that 100 years from now, human beings will be shocked that we ever allowed to happen? You probably have thoughts around that. I certainly have thoughts around that. Sometimes I think it's around social media. I'm going to leave that right there. Okay. And then obviously organizational values. Companies and institutions define their own organizational ethics. Patagonia is an example, Chick-fil-A, right? Their values shape, their company's internal. Who do we hire? It's based on this, right? Who do we fire? Based on this, right? What products are we going to put out to the world? It's based on this, okay? So again, ethics really the importance of talking about ethics in a business class is to determine how do you set culture. Okay. That's the most important thing. You've got to understand your ethics so you can set culture, because again, nirvana is when you hire people whose moral code matches up to your organizational ethics. That's where you're going to find people who are happy and showing up to work every single day. So as we say here, organizational culture is formed at the intersection of organizational ethics and personal morals. I'm going to say it one more time. Organizational culture is formed at the intersection of organizational ethics and personal morals. That's why it's important, okay? to know your organizational principles and values and hire people who line up with those principles and values. Okay, it goes back to everything we've been talking about this entire class, the PVM, PV. You got to know your purpose, vision, mission, your principles, values. Okay. You use mental models as you make better decisions. But once you know all this, then you hire only for this. And for those of you who don't necessarily, maybe you're not going to go in and be a boss or a leader, a CEO one day. You're going to work for a company, and nothing wrong with that. You got to know your PV and PV, and then you find organizations that match that. That's where you're going to find nirvana. But if you don't, you got to understand, you can't change the organizational ethics. I tell people all the time, don't try to be a crusader. It's not going to work. Okay. So you want to make better decisions, have better mental models. You want to hire better people. Make sure you understand your organizational ethics, that's your principles and your values, and you hire and your purpose, vision, mission. But certainly behavior wise, your principles, values, rules, unwavering rules for life, and then the behaviors that we expect, and you hire for that. And that's how it all works out. I hope this has been value add for you. This is your last podcast for the class. I want to thank you all. You guys have been doing a phenomenal job in this class. I have 2 sections that I'm teaching this semester. Both sections, you're killing it, doing an amazing, amazing job. Let's end strong. We've just got 1 more week here. Let's make sure we finish strong and no more podcasts. All right. But thank you for the work that you've done. Take care, everybody. And I'll see you here, there, or on the other side. Feel free to reach out if you need me. Take care.